Hello everyone, welcome to this webinar on testing. We've got a few updates for you, some updates we didn't expect when we booked in this webinar that we'll be talking about, but there you go, that's the world of testing, so we're going to update you on those. Very pleased to be joined today by my colleague Dan Escott. Dan is our academic director. For those of you who don't know, I'm the director, or one of the directors of US Education. Dan is our academic director, so he oversees the curriculum, oversees the progression of tutors and indeed students within UES. So Dan is our resident expert on SAT and ACT. Dan, before we get started, do you want to give everyone a little bit of a lowdown on your background?
Sure. First off, welcome to everyone. Glad to have those who are joining us live and those who will be joining us after the fact. I'm very much a standardized test geek. My first job out of college was standardized testing. I also taught social studies within the Philadelphia School District, but I've been teaching predominantly the SATs and ACTs for over a decade now. Essentially, I take every test I can get my hands on and I break down the patterns of the test into worksheets and videos that are all part of the UES curriculum and there to make the preparation process as easy as possible for students.
Great, thanks Dan. We're very pleased that Dan is with us. Just to let everyone know, a little bit of housekeeping. If you've got questions, and I'm sure you will have, everyone always does, please pop them in the Q&A box. You'll see that at the bottom of your screen, and just write your question in there. We will get to it. If it's really pertinent, I'll answer it straight away. Otherwise, we'll answer them at the end of Dan and I speaking, which hopefully won't be more than about 20 to 25 minutes. If you want to say anything else, just comment on how great we're doing, you can write it in the chat box. But otherwise, please put the questions in the Q&A. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen and hopefully everyone can see this. So there we are, there's UES. I'm Jason, this is Dan, and we're going to give an update on the SAT and ACT, particularly the SAT, because that's where the changes will be, at least the next changes, we think. About UES, I'm sure most of you tuning in will know about this, but we've been running almost 9 years now. We work with around 800 students a year, which is roughly somewhere between a third and a quarter of all students, or the total number of students applying to the US each year from the UK. We do that in many forms. We help students with the SAT and ACT, that's what we're talking about today. We also help students with US applications, choosing colleges, writing their essays, everything else that's involved. And we work with lots of schools. Many of you will know us through your school, but we have about 200 schools in the UK within our network. We work with many on top of that as well. Today, though, we are talking about tests, probably the most exciting bit of all US applications, and hopefully you can detect my sarcasm. There are good things about them and there are bad things, and we're going to try and talk about those today. So a quick introduction to the tests, just to set the scene, overview of the testing landscape, so what's happening at the moment, the history of the tests, why they exist, more changes to the test. So we're going to talk about the digital SAT that is coming in reasonably soon. Dan will talk about whether or not you should even take the test, and if so, how should you prepare for them, and which version of the test should you take? The current SAT or the digital one? And then we'll finish off with a few more predictions. I'm glad to say that one of my predictions has come true, that the SAT would go digital. So I now think that every other one of my predictions will be true as well. 100% evidence for that so far. So quick introduction to the test. Most of you will not need an introduction to these, but there is an SAT and there is an ACT. They are rival tests. Students don't need to do both and shouldn't do both. Do the test that you score best in, and Dan will be talking a bit about that in a moment. We have a diagnostic test that almost everyone in the UK who takes tests takes. So it's pretty accurate and gives us a very good idea of what level the student is at and which test they should be doing. There was something called the SAT subject test. Very soon I'm going to stop putting these in the presentation because they have disappeared from everyone's memory. But they were around, I think, since the 1930s or something, Dan, is that right?
You probably know better than I do for that.
So I think they were around for coming on for 90 years. So it will be a long time before everyone forgets about them. But they no longer exist. So you do not have to do subject tests, but it's worth pointing that out, at least for the next decade. Okay, just again to set the scene, what happened this year and last? Obviously, there was COVID-19, which forced a lot of schools and test centres to close. Many test takes were cancelled, and therefore many colleges, in fact, most colleges, dropped their SAT and ACT requirements. They have extended that in many cases for the next few years. And this is called test optional or test blind. Test optional is when schools don't require the test, but will look at it if you submit them. Test blind is when they will not even accept a test score in most cases. So the major changes were that subject test was scrapped. The SAT essay has been scrapped. Most colleges won't actually even look at the ACT essay anymore, if indeed any of them do. And there is now a digital SAT. More on that in a moment. What does test optional mean? It means you don't have to submit the test scores. You can still submit them if you like, and they will be considered if you submit them. And this will help your application if they're good scores. Now, I have spoken at length about what good means. Good is subjective. It depends on the college you're applying to, and it depends on you. If you are a very, very good student, A-star predictions, or 43 in your IB, you want to be getting high SAT and ACT scores. Otherwise, you probably shouldn't be doing it or shouldn't be submitting them. Okay, Dan, I'm going to pass over to you now.
Sure.
Why do these tests exist? I've got some prompts, but maybe you can add some color to this. So let's talk about these one by one. So first of all, they give us a chance for students to show off their skills further. What does this mean, and what skills are we talking about here?
Yeah, so the great thing about both of these tests is they are meant to test on college readiness skills. There's plenty of overlap between both the SAT and the ACT, but they both test reading comprehension. They test data literacy and a lot of core math concepts that deal with algebra, percentages, ratios, and in addition, essential grammar skills as well. So a big part of both of these tests is being able to show your college readiness or college preparedness. So a large reason why they exist is for students to be able to communicate that to schools in a way beyond their GPA and their grades in school.
Great, and the next point we've got is, I think you touched on this, it allows colleges to see how ready students are. So when you say college preparedness, what are the skills that colleges actually care about?
Yeah, so a big part of both tests is data literacy. The ACT has a science section that is less about necessarily background knowledge on science and more about the ability to understand inputs and outputs or independent and dependent variables in a scientific experiment and their interplay. The SAT has a lot of word problems, multi-step problem solving, and lateral thinking. So colleges want to be able to determine if students are kind of problem solvers and independent thinkers. And these tests, both now, it hasn't always been this way, but both tests align heavily with content that's learned in school. And whereas in the United States is vast, and you have many different schools with their unique systems and their unique programs, this test is standardized and enables universities to compare students across different states and schools, and to be able to determine at what level students have college readiness skills.
Great, and I think that point about being standardized across different states and indeed different countries is mentioned here in a moment. But one thing for me, Dan, is that I think that one of the things this test is very good at is testing whether or not you are willing to work hard at something. One of the kind of cliches, and there's only a certain amount of truth to this, is that these tests test how good you are at the test. And the way to get good at the test is to practice it and work hard at it. It's quite a humbling test, isn't it? In that if you're very, very good at school and you walk in cold to one of these tests, you're not going to do very well. So can you maybe touch on a little bit about the fact that these tests are pretty good at making sure that someone has worked hard at them?
Sure, absolutely. So the first thing I want to make clear is that the content and the skills developed and learned for these tests overlap heavily with the skills that are learned and developed in school. But what these tests do is they end up testing these skills in their own unique way. The analogy I like to use is you may be an excellent football player, and you may be excellent at football and the concept of team sports. But then if I ask you to play rugby or to pick up another sport, a lot of your skills will be transferable, but it will take time to figure out how to transfer them. And there'll be other skills that you just may not have and you'll need to learn and develop. So the great thing about both of these tests is that there's a lot of synergy between what you're learning for the tests and what you need to know for school. But by the same token, it takes time to be able to learn what's on these tests specifically and how the questions are asked and some of the patterns of the tests. And the fortunate thing is UES has you covered. I have you covered. I've been doing this, as I said, for over a decade. I take these tests for fun, as bad as that sounds. But the worksheets and the videos take everything you're going to see, tell you how often you're going to see it, how you're going to see it, and present it in a digestible way. What you need to do as the student, though, is you need to dedicate the time to prepare. Just as an A-level carries a lot of weight and significance, and we'll talk more about this later, these tests still carry a lot of weight. And you can usually get the most bang for your buck hours-wise preparing for these tests. If you think about how much time you spend on A-levels and GCSEs, you only need to spend a fraction of that time preparing for this test. But by a fraction of that time, I mean, you should probably start about 6 months out, roughly.
Great, thanks for that. We mentioned about the fact that they are standardized and allow colleges to compare students all over the world. One thing I will say as someone who counsels students is that US admissions are holistic. One score for one student is not the same as the same score for another student. It has to be taken in context. But they do provide evidence in lieu of school exams. And one thing I'd like to say is the fact that during COVID, this was very pronounced in the fact that students were leaving school without ever actually having done GCSEs or A-levels. And we had centre assessed grades. And these tests were a way of showing colleges that they actually were as good as they said they were. Even outside of COVID, it still matters because students from the UK in particular will be applying on the basis of predicted A-levels. Yes, hopefully they'll have GCSEs, but the colleges don't actually know that the students are going to achieve the grades that the school says they will. Hopefully everyone listening will get their grades, but what the SAT or ACT does is show that the student actually is as good as they say they are. So it's helpful in that respect. Okay. I've put the new SAT because it was only a year or so ago. I think we stopped calling the SAT the new SAT. Yeah. And that's because the SAT changes regularly, both tests do. The last time it changed was 2016. It was a pretty dramatic overhaul in 2016. I'm not going to spend lots of time telling everyone what it used to be like, although I will say that it was pretty horrendous. So definitely the changes, I think, were for the best. But it's been changed again, hasn't it, Dan? So shall we talk through what's happened? First of all, the major points. It's going to come in March next year, UK and internationally. So outside of the US, it will be March 2023. We think it's going to be a year later in the US. So they are, as most testing boards do, using us as guinea pigs again. It will be a digital test, which means it'll be on computer. It will be in a test center, at least to start with. More on this in a moment, but students can use their own laptop, so they don't have to worry about going in and getting a unfamiliar computer. It will likely have software on it that has an embedded calculator. It's only going to be 2 hours long. So Dan, do you want to talk about the changes a bit more in depth and what this means?
Sure. And another bullet point is that the sections will be adaptive within the sections. So each section will be broken up. Oh, there we go. So yeah, so the first thing that I guess is important to note is with test optional and the fact that what College Board wants to do is they want to make taking this test and students being able to present their college readiness skills as seamless as possible. So going down to 2 hours, naturally kind of catching up to the 21st century and making this a digital test. What that does is it just makes things a lot more seamless. In the past, you would need to wait weeks to get your score back. Now it's just a matter of days to get your score back. The other big thing is the passages are going to be shorter on the reading section, and each passage will only have one question with it. Math will be calculator the whole way, whereas the current test is only calculator for part of the math section, a larger part of it, but only part of it. So I think what the SAT is doing here is they're very much trying to stay relevant and in a partnership with students and colleges in the era of test optional. I think they're trying to say if we can provide a relevant metric that's easy enough to take and it only takes 2 hours of your time, why not? What do you have to lose by taking this test and being able to provide this information to colleges?
Great, thanks for that, Dan. And I want to say a little bit on the adaptive by section bit, because this is not new, actually. There are other tests that have an adaptive nature. Anyone who's been going for any post-grads, like masters, PhDs, might have heard of the GRE. People applying for business school might have heard of the GMAT. Both of those tests are adaptive in some way. The GMAT is adaptive by question, which means that every time you get a question right within a section, the next one is going to be slightly harder. And the idea is that the questions get harder and easier as you get them right and wrong, and then it levels off towards your sort of score. Now, the GRE, slightly different, it's adaptive by section. You would have 2 sections of maths, 2 sections of English, or verbal as they call it. First one is standard, second one, the level depends on how well you did in the first one. So this is how we think it's going to work for the SAT, is that the first section of maths you do will be at a certain level. If you get everything right, your second section is going to be harder. Exactly how they work out and statistically make sure that the level is appropriate to your level is another matter, and it'll be interesting to see how much data the College Board gives on that. GMAT are pretty good actually at explaining how their system works, but we're not quite sure how the College Board will do on that front. But it's not a new thing. It's fairly established technique for understanding people's levels on tests, and it might be a good thing because students should only see questions that are appropriate to their level. On the other hand, might not be a great thing because you want students in the end to be able to get everything right and score top marks, but we'll have to see what that is like on the new test. Okay, moving on then, Dan. Should students prepare for the test then? Should they prepare for the new test, given that it's a change at all?
Yeah, so the first thing I'll say is that the current test, the test that's been around since March 2016, is a test that's very knowable. It's a test that we've identified the patterns. We have an entire curriculum based around that test. And that test remains relevant until December 2022. So there's still plenty of time to prepare for that test. And we, as Jason mentioned earlier, we have a diagnostic. Students who tend to favor the SAT are those who are strong math students. So they'd want 50% of their grade to be math, which is the way it is on the SAT. And tend to be students who are kind of multi-step problem solvers and prefer more time to think. If that sounds like you, the current SAT may very much still be your test, and there's plenty of time to prepare for that test. The other thing is that the skills for the SAT and ACT are transferable across both tests. So the grammar for each test, it's almost 100% overlap in what's expected. So by preparing for the current SAT, you still have the opportunity to switch to the ACT if need be. And by the same token, the shift from the 2015 SAT to the 2016 SAT carried a lot of the same material over. So there are certain college readiness skills that are always college readiness skills, so they'll always be tested. So by preparing for the current SAT, in a lot of ways, you'll be prepared for the ACT if need be, and the new SAT. With the new SAT, the prediction is that Khan Academy will start to have content for that test as early as autumn 2022. So that doesn't give a lot of time for the international students, unfortunately. And those are the students who always seem to get shortchanged when it comes to US-based testing.
Okay. We've talked a lot about the skills being tested already, so I'm not sure that we need to go over that again. And as you've pointed out, Dan, the new test should be testing the same skills in terms of college preparedness. Do you want to talk a bit about what the difference is between the SAT and ACT in your mind? And that might help people understand which test they should be going for, with the caveat that, of course, there's going to be a new SAT and also we have a diagnostic test.
Sure. Well, we haven't given the ACT that much love so far, so I think I'll start with the ACT. The ACT is a very straightforward and literal test. It tends to favor students who are decisive thinkers. The ACT, there's only one section, the math section, where you have 1 minute per problem. The other sections average under a minute per problem. That said, they're very straightforward. The reading and science sections tend to ask questions that don't involve a lot of analysis. They're more just kind of quickly processing what's in front of you. So the ACT favors students who are kind of decisive, quick thinkers, and very literal in the way they process things. It's a good test, but it's time prohibitive for some students. The SAT affords over a minute per problem on all sections except one, and it tends to favor strong readers. There's more analysis on the reading section of the SAT, and it favors students who consider themselves strong with math, because sections 3 and 4, 50% of the test is math. The interesting thing about SAT math is it involves a lot more word problems and multi-step problem solving. Part of the SAT's paradigm shift in 2016 was kind of real world relevancy and data literacy. So they don't just give you a linear equation to solve, they'll give you a linear equation with a word problem, and they'll want to know what the gradient or slope actually means based off of the word problem, or what the y-intercept means. But yeah, the key difference is that the ACT is just a little bit faster paced, but more literal than the SAT, and the SAT is more of a multi-step problem solving test.
Great, thanks for that. And I'm going to talk a bit about this in terms of timing for the new SAT, but in general, I think you mentioned earlier that, Dan, that students should think about starting about 6 months before taking the test. Is that right?
It depends on the type of experience the student wants preparing for the test. 3 months tends to be a little bit stressful and a tight turnaround. If a student starts and they're already fairly close to their goal score, then 3 months out is fine. But if you're starting 3 months out, you'll probably want to put in about an hour a day to prepare for the test. Again, an important thing to remember is that this test carries the same weight or significance that A-levels do in a lot of ways. So if you want to put your best foot forward and to represent yourself to the best of your ability and to maximize your score, you'll want enough kind of runtime to prepare for this test. For each test, we have 16 math worksheets and videos in addition to a backbone of curriculum that already existed before I joined UES. We have about 10 grammar worksheets and videos, and we have videos for the science and the reading. So if you start far enough out, you can cover the entire curriculum and content that we have, and there'll be absolutely zero surprises on test day. So my recommendation is probably to start 6 months out or earlier. Some students start even year 10, year 11, and what they find is that as they prepare for this test, they're learning a lot of material and skills that bolster their confidence in school. So there's a very nice synergy between preparing for these tests in school, because as stated earlier, these tests very much reflect school curriculum. That wasn't always true in the past, but it is very much true in the present.
Great. And on that note, I want to just talk a bit about the international test dates. So for the ACT, nice and easy, they are each year. The next one available is April. We just had a February ACT date. The next one's April, then there's June and July. Then after July, you'll be able to register for the next academic year of tests, which will be September, October, December, February, and April. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 test dates a year. Remember, with the ACT, you can take it on a Friday or Saturday in the afternoon or the morning. So there's 4 sessions per test window. And if you're doing it with accommodations, which means extra time, please read the blog that's on our website. If you go to our website /blog, you will find an article on there that I wrote in conjunction with a teacher who does a lot of accommodations for ACT, and the ACT confirmed that my understanding of this was correct as well. But it's really, really important that students and parents and teachers follow that guidance in the blog, because if you need extra time for the ACT, doing it in a test centre is nigh on impossible, because there aren't many. There is one, Marlborough College, but it is far, far easier to get your school to help you with that. So I just wanted to say that if you need extra time on the ACT, start early, follow the guidance in the blog before you register. Current SAT, there is a March date coming up soon. It's too late to register, but if you are registered for that, you will be doing the current SAT. The next one is May. You can still register for that. Then after kind of June time, you'll be able to register for the next academic year, which will be August, October, December for the current SAT. For the digital SAT, as we said, it's going to start in March next year. So March 2023, then May and August. And indeed, there will be October and December tests of that year as well. But what this means is that you have to be a bit careful, depending on what year you're in, which tests you think you might be preparing for. Now, if you're doing ACT, it doesn't matter. But if you are in a current year 11 or grade 10, as the Americans would say, we normally say start after your GCSEs. Now, in some cases, we say start earlier, that's fine. But we really, really want to make sure that you do as well as possible in your GCSE. So you shouldn't be doing things that would get in the way of you doing well. Of course, other things in your application matter. So what you're doing inside and outside of school matters. So your extracurriculars and things like that, you should also do them well. But you must make sure that you get good GCSEs. They matter. So if your SAT is going, or ACT is going to encumber you there, but as Dan said, it might not, but you do have to make sure that you're putting your best foot forward there. So if you're doing the SAT, start after the GCSEs this summer, take it in August, October, and December of this year, and you should be done. That is enough time, because you've got all of the summer. Take a first one in August, take a second one in October. If you need to, take a third one in December. Should be done. If not, you will go through into the next cycle, starting in March 2023, and then you will be doing the digital SAT. So hopefully that's some motivation to get it done quickly. But current year 12s, if you should really be finished with your testing this academic year. So ideally, your last one should be August or September. I realized I spelled September incorrectly there, but you should be done with the ACT by September, if not earlier. We really encourage everyone to get all of their testing out the way by the end of year 12, your junior year at school. Doing it later means that you're ending up applying to colleges whilst not knowing what your SAT or ACT score is. That makes it very, very difficult. Also makes year 13 an absolute nightmare. Everyone, please take our diagnostic tests. I know most people do. If you might already know which tests you want to prepare for, or you might want some advice, and you're welcome to contact us about that. and we will happily talk to you about that. And Dan is often on the phone to parents and students, helping them with those choices. Registration is open, of course, so you can register for the ACT there, my.act.org, up until the July test. For the SAT, you can register through to, when I say the June test is May in the UK, June in America, and you can register there. June, July time is when the registration comes online for the next academic year, but always register early. We normally encourage people to book in tests really early because otherwise they do get full up. I'm going to make some more predictions, Dan.
Yeah, let me hear them.
Agree or disagree with me, but they're pretty much the same as before, with one of them that has come true. Colleges will continue to accept test scores. There is no sign that colleges are going to completely stop requiring tests. There are some colleges that have gone test blind. UC, University of California system, and Cal State system have gone test blind, so you can't even submit scores there. But there is a caveat. If you're applying to UC, at least some of the colleges, they may accept your test score to help with placement. So in other words, to understand what level you're at in order to decide what classes you'll be taking when you're at college. Won't be used in the admissions process, but again, taking a test could be useful there. There are other places that have gone test blind, but lots of places that are test optional. Well, the big famous private universities are mostly test optional, which means you can submit the scores. Many people do. Some colleges absolutely still require them. Florida State system still requires them. Georgetown still requires them. And there are other places, hundreds of places, in fact. So you must be careful. And I will say, people going for scholarships, like sports scholarships, or people who want merit scholarships or want financial aid, test scores can really help. So please don't assume that you shouldn't be doing the tests. Tests will become more important, not less. Internationally, I should say, this is really due to those previous A-level and GCSE cancellations, but also the fact that you're applying on the basis of predicted grades. Students who are ambitious and want to go to America tend to have very good predictions, and therefore setting yourself apart in other ways is a good thing. Not always appropriate to do tests, but for many people in the UK, we are seeing more people do tests, not fewer. SAT will move away from test centres. So SAT is going digital. There's the one that's come true. At the moment, they're saying that it will be in a test centre, but they are saying that students can bring their own laptops. This means it's not going to be done on a server in the test centre like with the ACT. It's going to be done wirelessly, and students can use any computer. Presumably it will have software that's loaded onto it, but that means in the future, students won't have to be in a test centre. Lots of other tests, GRE, GMAT, APs even last year, and tests like TOEFL and IELTS are done online, on computer, at home. There is online invigilation that makes that secure. So in the future, we expect SAT to go that way. I still think that SAT and ACT will offer at-home testing, hopefully next year, maybe not. I think the SAT is most likely to do that. Probably once they've assessed how it works internationally, maybe 2024, they'll bring that in. It's only a matter of time before ACT do this. ACT are digital already internationally, will be very soon in the US, and it already is for if you're doing section retesting. And it's inevitable that they will offer at-home testing eventually for that. And it will become the norm because it's much easier and you don't have to worry about booking a test center. SAT, SA has been scrapped. No one in terms of the colleges in America look at the ACT SA anymore. So I'm pretty sure that they will scrap that SA eventually. You don't need to prepare for it. Okay, just my usual extra considerations. Remember, it's not just about tests. Tests are really important, but US applications are holistic, as I've been saying. Students should think about what they can do to highlight their best qualities. How can they use their time wisely? On that note, we have an upcoming event. This is always our most popular event of the year, COVID or no COVID. This year, it is going to be in person again. It is on the 21st of March. That's the Monday, the 21st of March in the evening at Wetherby Senior School in Marylebone in London. Highly recommend that you book onto that as soon as possible because it always gets sold out. It's £10 for parents, it's free for students, it's £45 for teachers. It's a really big fun event where you will get to play the part of an admissions officer, guided by real admissions officers from some brilliant colleges. We've got USC, Notre Dame, NYU, Endicott coming, and maybe a few others. And you'll get to find out how colleges actually make their decisions. So it's very, very useful for anyone thinking about applying to America. So please do book onto that as soon as possible. And there's a URL. It's our website, /mock-admissions-event. If you just go to our events page, you'll find it as well. So we have lots of services. Obviously, we help people with the SAT and ACT. We do have a college counselling service as well, where we help students go through the whole application process, applying to America, writing essays, choosing colleges, getting references, demonstrating interest to the colleges, everything else on top of the testing. Testing is something that takes a lot of time to get right and can be very important, but it is not the only thing in your application. We do have courses, Easter courses coming up for SAT and ACT, and there's also weekly courses, and private tuition, of course. If you want Dan, you'll have to get in there quickly because Dan's always our most popular tutor. There's our diagnostic test again. If anyone's thinking about sports scholarships, we can point you towards people that we trust. We don't do it. We're not the experts on it. We do the academic side of things, but we know people who we do trust. There are not many of them in the UK who we think are completely trustworthy, but we will point you towards the right ones. And if you're applying to anywhere else, we also have people who can help with that. And there's our contact details again. But if you want to book in a call with me or another director for free, you can go to that URL at the top there, ueseducation.com/free-call. And you'll be able to book in a time with us there to chat about college counselling, or indeed if you've got other questions about US applications in general. Okay, we've talked a lot, Dan, so I'm going to open it up to questions. If anyone's got a question, please type it in the Q&A box at the bottom. You'll see that button there. Any questions about testing at all? If you've got other questions about applications, feel free to pop it in there as well, and we'll answer it if we've got time. Hopefully we'll be able to answer all your questions. There are always some that I can predict will come up. I know that people are always ask about what sort of scores they should need. Dan, dare I ask you, what is a good score? What do you need to go to, I don't know, let's pick a college. Dan, you went to Wake Forest, didn't you?
Yes, one of the first schools to go test optional.
Yeah.
A pre-COVID test optional school.
Yeah, long time test optional now. Doesn't stop people applying there with test scores though, does it?
No, so the Wake Forest, so the way it works with test scores is in the era of test optional, you really want to submit your score if it's below the, if it's above the median score or better. If it's below, you want to think twice about submitting it. Depends how close it is. But if you're looking, so as a result, there has been inflation in published scores because students who don't have the stronger scores aren't submitting them when they apply to schools, and when they get in, their scores just aren't available or published. You're only getting the strongest scores that are being published. But with inflated scores, if you're applying to any of the top 25 most competitive schools, ACT, you're probably going to want a 34 or higher as your super score. SAT, probably 1450, maybe even 1500 or higher. If you're not applying to schools that are looking for students who are in the 98th percentile, your test score doesn't need to be that high. Just depends where you're applying. But for the schools that we get asked about a lot, the most competitive ones, you do need to be in the 98th percentile. If you're looking more to apply to a big state school that will take in maybe 30, 40,000 students, you'll probably be okay with an ACT score of 26, 27 or higher, SAT score 1300 or higher, which puts you more around kind of the 75th, 80th percentile. the median score of all test takers, whether they're college bound or not, on both the SAT and the ACT. The SAT, it's about a 1050 roughly, and ACT about a 20 to a 22.
Great, thanks, Dan. Great, we've got a few questions coming in, really good questions here. First of all, we've got one here that may or may not be written by the College Board, because it says, do you think the trial SAT tests offered by Khan Academy are useful? What do you think, Dan?
Yeah, so any material that Khan Academy has is approved by College Board. Khan Academy is partnered with College Board. So everything that Khan Academy shares and produces is College Board approved college relevant to their test. So I would absolutely say that the material is very relevant. The caveat that I always give with Khan Academy is that they're not going to teach specific test taking strategies. SAT's position will always be that their test is a reflection of content learned in school, and it's not a test of kind of patterns and kind of multiple choice test taking strategies and things like that. So Khan Academy won't really look at that side of preparing for the test. Whereas if you work with someone at UES or any other non-Khan Academy testing organization, they will kind of attack the test in a more holistic way, not just purely learning the content, but the test taking strategy as well. But yes, the material in Khan Academy is very, very relevant. It's supervised by College Board itself.
Good. Great. A good question here that allows us to talk a little bit more about different sections. But someone said to study engineering. So if you're applying to an engineering school, do they put more weight on the maths section of the SAT? The answer is probably yes, in most cases, because they need to be sure that your maths is good enough. Now, there's other ways you can show that your maths is good, but let's say you're applying to a really top engineering college, let's say Caltech or something. They're going to expect your maths to be very, very good on there, although Caltech is now test blind. But so let's say you're applying to MIT or something, you're submitting test scores, you really need to have pretty high math scores. But the better the college is in general, the higher they're going to expect your scores to be overall anyway. Now, normally we say that make sure that your overall score is in a certain range, and make sure that your maths and English sections are not too different. So if you want to get 800 on the math and only 600 on the English, shows there's a bit of a problem there. But what you can do, go on the college websites, and you can normally find the information about what the admitted students from the previous year got on their tests on average. And you'll be able to see, normally broken down by the English and maths, what kind of ranges you expect. So for some colleges, you would expect the English to be slightly better. For some colleges, you would expect the maths to be slightly better. But in general, yes, for engineering, you would expect admitted students probably to be doing slightly better on their maths. In terms of putting more weight on it, they're going to be looking at everything holistically. It's more the case that if you had a low math score, that might raise a bit of a red flag if you're applying to an engineering school. Okay, a good question here. Can you sit the SAT or ACT more than once? Yes, you can do it as many times as you want. Although I think it might have been you, Dan, that discovered that there is an official limit, I think, on the ACT. Do you remember what that is?
Not that I know of. I think the limit is just the number of dates that are offered. What you can do with the ACT is you can delete your score if you don't like it.
Yeah, well, somewhere in the small print, I think of the ACT, there's something that says you can't take it more than about 12 times.
Oh, okay. Well, I wouldn't recommend even getting up to that number.
I've never known anyone to take the test anywhere near that number of times. I think the most I've seen is maybe 5 times.
Sure.
But the simple answer is you can do it as many times as you want, but we generally recommend no more than 3 official tests. There's a few reasons for that. One is that there are some places that might require you to submit all your scores. And if you've done it many, many times, it's going to start to look a bit odd. Not because they're worried about you doing too many tests. They're more worried that you're not spending your time wisely, not putting your efforts in the right places in terms of your admission. There's also something to be said for, look, if you're not learning from your mistakes, stop. If you've reached your limit, stop and do something better with your time. But generally what we say to people is you should prepare in plenty of time. You should take lots of mock tests so you know how you're performing on a real test. Take a real test. It's never as good as you want it to be on the first one. See how you do, learn from that, and then build up to the next one, and then you'll know how you feel the next time. Would you agree with that, Dan?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the great thing about these tests is that on the internet, there are plenty of past test papers. So you should go into the test knowing exactly how you're scoring and what to expect on test day. And if you don't feel like you're at the score range that you're targeting yet, then just defer taking the test until you are.
Great. And what I should say is that there are some people, or there was one school of thought that says you've got to know where you're applying before you take the test so that you know what you need to get or whether you should do the test. I'm not sure I completely agree with that, because if you prepare early, first of all, it's going to teach you things about yourself and give you skills that are going to be quite useful. Secondly, if you start early, you will have plenty of time to work out what kind of test taker you are, what kind of level you can get before you've even taken the test. And if you realize after 5 or 6 months of preparing, look, I'm not going to get the sort of scores that are going to be useful for somewhere like Princeton, so maybe I just won't do the test. And that's absolutely fine, but you can't make that decision at the last minute. You've got to make it early. Start early, and then you'll understand whether or not you should be taking the test at all. Great, there are no more questions. So I'm going to stop it there, and I'm just going to say thank you very much to everyone for listening. I hope that you've learned a little bit, at least, about what's coming up with the tests. Obviously, we're going to update people as and when more changes are announced. Hopefully, there won't be any too many dramatic ones in the near future. But if you've got any questions at all, you can email us, you can call us, and there is that free call link again that I gave you. So, Dan, thank you very much for joining.
Yeah, my pleasure. My pleasure.
And thank you to everyone for tuning in, and we'll hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.